and bad news for you this evening. The good news is the chat show is back with 3 more great guests for you. The bad news is, after all the jokes you've heard so far, by order of the management, it has been decreed I am not to tell any of my writing-themed jokes. Sorry? Unless, by popular demand, what do you think? You know, I love working at Swan. And I really appreciate that, because it's been quite a tough year, to be frank with you. It's been quite a tough year. You know, I'm working in Cambridge now, and it is a city full of intellect and full of questions. For example, last week a professor pointed at me and said, "Name 2 pronouns." And I said, "Who? Me?" And I've struggled with the punctuation thing as well, particularly commas. Commas have been bothering me. And losing commas is a real problem when you're in a lecture theatre and you say to the group, "Let's cut and paste, kids." Only a couple more to go, promise. But to try to cheer myself up, I thought I would read some great literature. It always helps, doesn't it? Read a great book. So I thought I would try Great Expectations. But it wasn't as good as I thought it would be. Can you manage one more? Just one. And this is good news, just to leave this on a really upbeat note. I've got a new story I'm working on and I'm liking it. It's coming together really well. It's complex, it's multi-layered, it's got a beautiful structure. It flips back and forth between the past, the present and the future. Oh yeah, it's really tense. Should we get on with the chat show? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your guests tonight. First of all, Mr. A A Dhand. He said terrible jokes. We'll make sure the tough questions go to him. Also, please welcome Alison Chisholm. Thank you. And last but by no means least, Sophie Hannah. One with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I could introduce our panel tonight, but I thought rather than do that, I would ask them to introduce themselves with this challenge, to do it in 30 seconds and to include in it one surprising fact about themselves. Be prepared to be surprised. Amit.
My name is A A Dhand. I write under the name of A A Dhand. I am a novelist, crime writer, corner shopkeeper and pharmacist. Okay, a strange fact about me, which absolutely cannot leave this room, is I'm obsessed with doing those quizzes that you get in women's magazines, because my wife buys them all the time. And the one that I did last week said, "Are you a lesbian?" And I did it, and it turns out that I am. So I'm confused, but strangely proud of myself.
Remember, that stays in this room. Alison.
Yep, I'm from Southport in Merseyside. I'd like to tell you I'm retired, but I haven't worked out what I'm going to do when I grow up yet. I do write rather a lot of poetry because that's the perfect genre for a lazy person. You have far fewer words to write than the novelists do. And my fact isn't nearly as exciting as his. I was just going to tell you that I'm the possessor of over 200 pairs of sandals and flip-flops. And also that I travel around the world and around Britain playing crazy golf.
Sophie, follow those two.
I'm Sophie Hannah. I am a poet, a crime writer, a self-help book writer, and a murder mystery musical writer. I also am the director of the Crime and Thriller Writing MA course at Cambridge University, and I am also the creator of the Dream Author Coaching Programme for writers. And my surprising fact is that approximately 2.5 weeks ago, my evening meal was very nearly, but not quite, ruined by George Clooney. I booked a table, I was on holiday, and I booked a table in this hotel where I was staying in one of their restaurants, and we arrived, and the person in charge said, no, you can't eat here tonight. I said, but I've booked a table. They said, well, okay, sit over there then, out of the way, and here's a really rubbish menu that was not the menu I knew belonged to that restaurant. And I was like, no, I've booked a table, I want a proper dinner, bring us your real menu. And they were all the entire waiting staff were acting really flustered, and then we soon found out what was going on. 10 minutes later, a party arrived involving George Clooney. He was there with his wife. And then we realised that the waiters were all trying to save the proper food for the Clooneys. So, George Clooney very nearly ruined my dinner, but didn't.
Well, two obvious points from that. First of all, you're fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of George Clooney lookalikes tonight. I know how many of the women are laughing at that. And we have not skimped on the menu here for you in the slightest.
Excellent.
Let me pick Alison up on that point about crazy golf. As you all know so very well, it can be bizarrely stressful and somewhat lonely being a writer. How does crazy golf help you?
Well, I've already suggested to you that I'm a pretty lazy person, and you certainly don't have to go as far around the crazy golf course as you do around Royal Birkdale, which is our local golf course. But it gives you a moment for quiet contemplation, and while you're trying to pot your ball into the top of the volcano or get it through the castle, your head can be somewhere else entirely. And because the person I play with is my husband, my head always is somewhere else entirely.
Amit, do you have any hobbies which help you in the writing world?
I mean, it's tough being a lesbian, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel your pain, Amit.
Hey, listen, the first question was like, are you attracted to women? So I was like, yeah. And it was just like, have you ever kissed a woman? I was like, yeah. It was like, are you attracted to men? I was like, no. By the time I finished the quiz, it was like 9 out of 10. It was like, you're definitely a lesbian. I was just like, what was the question again?
Don't worry, because I'm not sure I can remember myself. Do you have any hobbies which help you in the writing world?
Oh, right, of course, yes. That. Yeah, I like to listen to dark, dramatic music whilst I'm writing, before I'm writing, I'm trying to create ideas. So I have this really specific thing where I like to be in a dark room. It has to be completely dark, no light whatsoever. And I put the headphones on and I'm listening to really dramatic music like The Dark Knight or Gladiator soundtrack. And I always say to my wife, please, whatever happens, do not disturb me. Don't come into that room because my brain could be in serial killer territory in the middle of Bradford somewhere. It's really, really like tense moment. And she just doesn't get it, so I'll be literally, and I'll be really freaked out, my brain, and the lights are off and the music's on, she'll come in and flash the lights on. And at that point you can't help but bloody scream, because you're just so freaked out in your head. And I just cannot get her from stop doing it, she just doesn't understand, I don't know if she understands it, she just can't understand that. Please don't disturb me when I'm doing that. So that's generally my hobby that I like to do, is to freak myself out in public. Clearly I need therapy now.
We're certainly learning a lot about our guest tonight already, aren't we? Sophie, what about yourself? What are your hobbies or relaxing?
My obsessive hobby is swimming. I'm completely obsessed with swimming, and it's really helpful for writing in an indirect way, because I swim as often as I possibly can, several times a week at least, ideally every day. And when I'm swimming, I can't be doing anything else. And so my brain sort of goes into properly relaxed mode, and it's always when I have my best creative ideas while I'm swimming.
Good tip, thank you. Right, I'd like to just take you a little bit back in time now. And if I can start by asking you, Sophie, when did you know you wanted to be a writer, and how did you know?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to write. I started writing very, very young. I was probably about 6 or 7, and I started writing little stories and poems. I mean, really little ones. I think the first story I wrote was about 7 lines long. And I still remember, actually, it was about 2 girls, one called Mary and one called Anna. That's all I remember. I'm sure it was pretty exciting. So, you know, and then from then on, I just never really stopped writing. But I didn't really think I want to be a writer. I was quite happy just being somebody who wrote a lot. And I always prioritised my writing, which was my hobby, over everything I was supposed to be doing. So at school, once school got, you know, serious and boring, when I was supposed to be doing proper work to pass proper exams, I just never did a stroke of work. I was sort of clever enough that I could coast along and not fail anything, but I always reserved all of my mental energy for my hobby of writing. Even when that didn't go down very well with anybody, I was just like, this is the only thing I'm interested in. So I was quite happy to just pour all my energy into it without ever thinking, one day I'm going to be a writer. I was just somebody who was always going to write.
Alison, what about yourself?
I was always a bit slow on the uptake, so although thinking about it, I probably started off quite young. I was much older when it dawned on me that this is what I was designed to do. I went to a school where, through the primary department, every Friday night we were given a task to write over the weekend. Most weeks it was an essay or a story. It could be the history of a penny or what I did in my holidays, inspiring things like that. Just occasionally we had something a little different and the teacher said, write a poem instead. Everybody else in the class groaned and I thought, oh great, we've got the easy one. Some years later I ended up being involved in speech and drama, so reading a lot of poems written by other people and thinking on a herd level. I don't like the way this is going. I could do it better than that. Of course, it took me till I was about 20 before I actually tried it, but that's where it started.
Yeah, powerful memories. I know when I was younger, I think I was about 10 years old when I was asked to write a 50-word story at school. And I wrote a 50-word story not thinking much about it. It was about 2 kids who were always fighting, and it was a parody of the American-Russian rivalries. And I just wrote it without thinking about it. And it was the first time I remember really clearly when anyone said to me, that was really good. And that was such a powerful memory, I think that rooted into me. Amit, what about yourself? When did you know? How was that discovery come upon you? Apart from being a lesbian.
Oh dear. Yeah, so mine was really young. It was, you know, children's nursery rhymes. So I was always destined to be a writer because I used to create my own. So instead of like, this is ridiculous, but instead of the 3 little pigs and a big bad wolf, I felt a bit sorry for the wolf, so I wrote the 3 little wolves and a big bad pig. And then I wrote like the Billy Goat's Gruff 2, Return of the Troll. So I was like, it's quite clear he needs to come back. So I started writing my own like nursery rhymes, but I kind of like the way they ended some of them. And you don't really think about it. There's times you just a young kid who's got a creative imagination. But I never stopped. And when I transferred to sort of, I was reading Stephen King really young. So whichever Stephen King book I would read, maybe I was like, I don't know, 9 or 10, I'd always like try and copy what he'd written. So I remember reading Christine, the one about the car that comes alive. And I wanted to write like Christine's sister. So you know, the school holiday was supposed to be about writing about the book you'd read, which was normally Kes or, you know, something really, there was a reading list, but I was going back writing these terrible stories of, you know, Christine's sister or horror or drama or thrillers. I think nowadays you can get social services involved, to be honest. I always like to read books and then try to copy them or emulate them or try and change it. I loved doing that. I was like, what a great story, then how can I put my own spin on it? So I've always done that.
And just to follow up on that, now you have, all 3 of you, become very successful writers. Has the life, Amit, you start with, has it lived up to your expectations?
I mean, that's a really difficult question. I guess I write because I can't not write and I love writing. So I'm always going to write, irrespective of if I've been published or not. I mean, it's cathartic, it's it's a wonderful hobby, and I just really enjoy it. I get a thrill out of seeing computer and creating stories. Yeah, I did always want to be traditionally published and have like hardbacks and book launches. So yeah, it has lived up to my expectations from that point of view. I mean, I guess there's always something, you know, for me anyway, I always aspire for the next thing. So I think I'd like to do this, and I'd like to do that. I'd like to have, you know, #1 bestseller, or I'd like to be a New York Times bestseller, or I'd like to have win a BAFTA or some shit like that. You know, you're always writers. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm always dreaming. Like, I'm always dreaming of creating weird and wonderful stories in my head. Some of them involve my writing journey, and some of them don't. So, so far, I'm having a great time to do it. Yeah.
Alison, has it lived up to the life you expected?
Totally. There's nothing else I can think of where I could sit and stare into space and contemplate eternity for 3 hours at a time while my husband makes the tea.
I don't think we can argue with that. What about yourself, Sophie?
I never expected, so when I was a kid and a teenager and writing was the only thing I was really interested in, what I wanted to do was write, and I knew that I could do that because I was doing it, and I knew that I would always do that no matter what happened. I was pretty sure that I was going to get published. I just thought, why not? I can definitely do that. So I was pursuing that, but I didn't have any expectations of what that would be like. I didn't sort of think, you know, once I'm published, everything will be wonderful and people will send me diamonds in the post at all.
Does that happen much?
No, it's never happened. But I didn't think like that, and my desire to carry on writing wasn't based on any idea that, you know, things will be better or different then. And actually, I was quite happy where I was, just writing. And so what I wanted really was to just carry on writing, get better, and find ways for what I wrote to reach audiences. And I think it's really interesting because I do think that lots of people have expectations of how much better things will be when they are a writer in the eyes of the world instead of just a writer in their own mind. Loads of people don't even call themselves writers until they get to the point where they think everyone around them would go, yes, you are a writer. You know, so if you're working as a dentist, you might not think, well, I'm also a writer, I'm mainly a writer, but that can still be true. And so I think, you know, some of the writers who I know who have to deal with the most difficult and unpleasant feelings are the ones who think, once I'm published, then I'll feel happy and better. And then they get over that threshold and they go, oh no, I'm still me with my thoughts. I still don't feel any different. So yeah, I didn't have any expectations, but I was so committed to writing. I was like, whatever being a writer involves, even if it means someone throws a bucket of snails over your head every day, I'm totally 100% in. You know, because I didn't really have a choice. I didn't feel that I could not write.
Do you get snails often as well?
No.
No diamonds, no snails?
I did have some lovely snails in a restaurant. Where was I?
Not with George Clooney, apparently.
I do actually love eating snails, but that's another story.
Now, I'm going to take some questions from the audience in just a moment after this next question. But to get ready for that, I'm going to ask the panel this. What question at a writing event do you most hate being asked? Note there is a hint in this question. All right? Alison.
My worst question, if it doesn't rhyme, why do you call it a poem?
To which the answer is...
Have you got another 2 hours?
Amit.
God, I don't know, to be honest. Which question do I hate being asked? Probably that one.
Shall I spring to a fellow lesbian's rescue?
The one you just asked me.
If I spring to a fellow lesbian's rescue, you can get your drinks later, all right?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably that one. Yeah.
I'll ask Sophie first and give you a brief experience, all right? So Sophie, what do you hate being asked?
I genuinely don't hate being asked anything. I love being asked any question, but I actually love, like, if someone were to ask me a question that made me feel uncomfortable or that I didn't know the answer to, I would like that even more. Because, like, quite often you get asked the same questions, right? And that's fine, I'm very happy to answer those questions. But very occasionally, I'll go to an event and someone will ask me a question that's something I just haven't thought about, or something that I feel this resistance coming up, I think, don't really want to answer that. And then I think, oh, that's interesting. Why don't I want to? And then I get adept at handling a question that I didn't like hearing. So then I really like that. So there's no, I always say actually, I always say when I do events, ask me anything. Not only about, right, I'm happy to answer questions about absolutely anything, and I genuinely am. And sometimes people ask questions which could be seen as rude. Like once, I did a gig at the Women's Institute somewhere, and one of the questions this woman asked me after, she put her hand up and she said, "Is your husband a very patient man?" And I was like, what an amazing question. No one's ever asked me that before. So I said, like, my first thought was, for anyone who knew my husband, that would be hilarious, because he's one of the most impatient people I know. So I kind of went, no, he's really not. Why did you think he would be? And she said, oh, well, it's just that, you know, he obviously lets you do all this writing. So that was what she meant. But when I first heard the question, I thought, is she, like, sarcastically taking the mickey out of my husband? How does she even know? He's so impatient. So that was, no, but I just love it. I love the fact that when someone puts their hand up, you have no idea what they're going to ask you. I think that's quite adrenaline-y.
Have you ever thought about training some of our politicians?
Yeah, well, no, but one thing I have sort of noticed is that if someone asks you, I mean, this is for everybody, if you ever get asked a question you don't want to answer, it's really easy to handle it. So let's say somebody says to you, you know, if you had to have a steamy affair with someone in the current cabinet, let's say, the government, who would you pick? Now, let's say you don't want to answer that question because the answer is, I don't know, Rees-Mogg. Yeah.
Well, we had a heckle here saying Jacob Rees-Mogg. And it was Maria, and she did it with a big smile, all right?
So let's say you do not want to admit that the person that you are passionate about is Jacob Rees-Mogg, then what you do is, you act as though you are totally answering the question without answering the question. So what you do is you say, that is such an interesting question, and what I feel about that is that guacamole is a really amazing dip to have with a chili. I think the cabinet would all agree. And then you sound as though you've answered the question, and people are always too polite to go, yeah, that was a rubbish answer. And that is, of course, what politicians try to do all the time. Yeah.
Well, I like to try and prepare for just about anything to happen of an evening, but I didn't think we'd be discussing having an affair with Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, you've had a bit of breathing space. What do you not like being asked?
I've probably not been asked, but it's probably the assumption. I did a radio interview last month when the guy was like, so are you a millionaire because you're an author? And I was like, no. And he was like, so whereabouts are you? Have you got like a speedboat or a yacht or something? I guess it's just a misconception, just because you have a publishing deal, that means that you're now got 6 figures in the bank or some stuff like that. You know, there's still that misconception, I think, that because you're a published author, that just means that you sit there sleeping in a bed full of gold coins and some shit like that. As opposed to the fact that, no, I still work full-time as a pharmacist. You know, it's probably that misconception, I think, is a bit irritating.
Yeah, it particularly galls me when I'm talking to my friends. I've got friends who do many different things. And you tell them you're writing a book, and they say, oh, I'm going to write a book when I get a couple of weeks. And some of these people are like politicians or brain surgeons or airline pilots. Yeah, I'm going to learn how to fly an airplane when I get a couple of weeks or do some brain surgery or whatever. Right, let's have some questions from the audience. Right, let's have a big hand up. That gentleman who used to be Lance has got a roving mic. And he will bring it to you. So who's got a question for our brilliant panel? Now look, somebody save me from a question from Maria, please. Who's sympathising with Maria? We have to listen to our jokes tonight. Go on then.
So in recent years, a lot of...
Hang on a sec. We need to turn the microphone on.
Have you got it? I'm trying, Lance. Doing that. I don't know what's wrong.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
There we go.
Take 2.
No.
Oh, this is the one they
I'll
fixed.
repeat your question. If you say it, we'll repeat
The
it.
question.
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll repeat it.
So, in recent years, a lot of technology that was taken for granted, even in the recent past, has been identified as problematic. And I was wondering whether that's affected you in terms of work that you perhaps had published like a decade ago, whether it's affected the reception that even more recent work has had, and whether it's just like presented any challenges to you as a business.
Okay, so the question was about changing language and whether words and phrases and terms which were acceptable 5 or 10 years ago cause you problems now because you used them 5 or 10 years ago, or they've changed your use of language. Sophie, do you mind starting us off?
So the only time when I've been aware of like thinking about these kinds of things is when I'm writing my Poirot novels, and I have to think, you know, if there's something that Agatha would have included in her Poirot novels, and obviously she was writing at a different time, I wouldn't necessarily put something in that was exactly the same as what she would put in, but some things I would. So, the way in which the English upper middle class characters are dismissive of Poirot because he's a foreigner, that I do include, because that is actually, and it was when Agatha wrote it as well, it was her way of saying, look at these stupid English people thinking that the foreigner, well, he's actually brilliant and they're totally underestimating him. And she used to do the same with servants. There would always be the posh characters who said, oh, that's only a servant, you don't need to worry about them. And Agatha would show time and time again that actually the servant's testimony is just as reliable. So that kind of thing I will do. Sometimes in Agatha's books there were unfortunate choices of words which I wouldn't choose to do. So I think that's where it most crops up for me. But in a more general sense, you know, there are some things which are regarded as problematic now, which I don't think are problematic and I don't think should be, and so I would always, I wouldn't ever do something or not do something because of what somebody else might think. And I've been aware of this issue since the very beginning of my crime writing career. I wrote a book called Hurting Distance, in which the heroine has had an affair with a married man and then is plunged into a nightmare of psychological thrillery proportions. And I did a reading group event when it first came out, and there was a woman there who said, well, I can't sympathise with this woman. I don't care if she might get murdered because she slept with someone else's husband. And I don't think it's okay that you've got a heroine that we're meant to care about who is an adulterer. And so she found that really problematic. I had another reading group experience where someone had a problem with one of my heroines being a homeopath. Because she said homeopathy is quack doctoring, it's a scam. I don't care whether she gets murdered. So you know, people do think things like that. Now, when I heard those 2 points of view, I thought, you know, this is really interesting that someone would approach the book in this way, but it certainly didn't make me think that I shouldn't have an unfaithful woman and a homeopath as a protagonist. So I think it's really important for writers to always think, well, what do I think is a responsible and moral way to write? Because otherwise, if you're too much thinking about what other people will think, you often skip the stage of thinking, well, what do I think about this? If I think this is okay, then maybe it is.
Alison, I know poets think very, very carefully about language. What's your view?
Well, I agree with the points that Sophie's made, absolutely. One thing that does actually annoy me is when terminology is done retrospectively, and you look back when people were talking in a different way, thinking in a different way, and trying to alter what they were saying and thinking. To me, that's just patronising. Though I must tell you, I go to a church where at Christmas we are expected to sing, God rest ye merry, gentle folk. My own view with my own writing is I have always made it a point of principle to try never to say anything that's going to offend anybody, because I wouldn't do that in conversation, not deliberately.
Thank you. And Amit?
Yeah, is the answer.
Thank you, Amit. Okay. This is the point where I pin you down like Paxman and say, could you enlarge?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the right way to answer it. So let me start by saying, I do a lot of work with sex workers and addicts as a pharmacist. I look after that category of patients. And on Wednesday I'm doing a documentary series with a TV broadcaster talking about sex workers and their plight on the streets. Now, the current terminology would be sex workers. But in my books, in Streets of Darkness, when you're on the streets, and also I go on the streets of Bradford, and when you're on the streets, sex workers would be referred to as prostitutes or as whores, or the terminology that people use when they're talking about it. So if I'm talking in Streets of Darkness and two addicts are having a conversation, or a drug dealer is having a conversation, he won't use the terminology sex worker. He would use the phrase whore or prostitute, which is politically incorrect. The same person would also say mixed race, would say half caste instead of mixed race. So when I'm writing the books, and you do have this tussle with myself because I do get people emailing me about it and contacting me about it. So I guess my baseline is I do a lot of work with patients, sex workers, addicts, and it's really important for me because I love giving space on the page of my time to sort of people in society that are damaged or vulnerable. But when I'm writing the books, I have to ask myself, are the drug addicts on the streets or the dealers or the bad people in my books, they're not going to say the phrase sex worker, they're going to say prostitute or whore. And in that moment, I guess some people will read the books and say, you're using derogatory terminology. But then if I was to use the politically correct term, then that's not accurate for the people on the streets that are using that in dialogue, because I really don't think that you could go into the red light district in Bradford or Leeds and people would say, yes, I'm just going to go visit sex workers today. I know that we as professionals will use that, and it's the same when it comes to mixed race or half caste. The terminology has moved on, and sometimes it takes general public or human beings a little while to catch up, but it still takes me a while to catch up as well. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different changes. So it is a struggle, and I guess my editors are quite good at that as well. And in my second or third drafts, I'll have a draft where I read through it and think, in narration, am I using the right terminology as opposed to dialogue? I don't know if anybody else finds that.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial point. You have to have your characters talking in the way they would talk. And, if we can allow that fictional characters commit murders, as ours do, yours might not, ours, we're not endorsing murder, we're just writing a story that contains a murder. So, I think that is really important. It's whether the book is saying this is okay, or whether a character is behaving in a certain way. But I think you can, as long as you are clear on why you've made the decisions you've made, and you like your reasons, that's what you need to think about, not what will people think. Because it doesn't matter. People will think every possible species of crazy thing, whatever you do. You can be absolutely 100% on the case with politically correct language, and somebody can freak out, as happened to me. I mean, this is an example. So let's say I went to great lengths to please readers by being very politically correct. Then I get an email from a woman saying, one of your murder victims has my surname. I am offended and disgusted, and you've ruined my entire evening, not to mention my life. And so I wrote back and said, I don't know you, and obviously I didn't know this was your surname, but when I write, I just answered it as though it was I thought, let me try and help here. So I said, when I write a book, I have to give my characters names, and so I just choose names from a variety of sources, and I'm really sorry you're upset, but just in case you think that I've specially chosen that name because it sounded like a murderer's name or a murderer's name, that wasn't the case. I was just choosing names. And if my murderer hadn't had your name, then he would have had someone else's name, and I hope that makes you feel better. And she wrote back and said, it does not make me feel better. You have besmirched my name. And then she included a quote from Othello about somebody besmirching somebody's name. So, this is why you cannot worry about what's going to offend people. You just have to think, what do I want to do and why? And do I like my reasons? So I sometimes get readers saying to me, I wasn't really comfortable about this character because they had a lot of internalised misogyny. And I've had this said to me twice, and I said, can you explain what you mean? Tell me more. And in both cases, it meant that my protagonist, instead of like noticing that a man she was involved with was a complete rotter and sort of feministishly saying, "Go away, complete rotter," she kind of made excuses for him and thought maybe he wasn't so bad and ended up in more danger. And so, I don't know whether anyone would call that internalised misogyny, but what I said in response to this both times was, you know, I want to write about people who end up in difficult and dangerous situations. I write psychological thrillers, and so people don't always have ideas and beliefs that are going to land them in brilliant situations. You know, I write, you know, woman in peril thrillers, and so I'm going to carry on writing about women who maybe don't have the ideal set of beliefs in terms of how they should relate to men. But that doesn't mean I'm endorsing it. And so you just need to be able to answer and accept that you're never going to please everybody. And then the other way around, you can approach it as a reader as well. Has anyone read a book called The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle? Really brilliant, clever, experimental crime novel. I absolutely loved it, and a friend of mine who I recommended it to was really enjoying it at first, and then she rang me and said, "Well, I've given up that appalling book." I said, "Oh, did you not like?" She said, "No." She said, "When I got to the fat phobia," you know, it's an incredibly fat phobic book, because the main character, he appears in different bodies, and then one day he wakes up and he's in a fat body, having previously been in a very thin body, and he doesn't like this because he finds it harder to get out of the bath or whatever. Which, like, I think that might happen, you know. Anyway, when I read the book, I wasn't remotely offended by that. I didn't think, oh, it's fat phobic. I just thought, this is a story about some people. And so I think it's always worth remembering that we can always choose as readers not to be offended by stuff.
Okay. Right, thank you. Let's have another question here. Come on then, Maria, come on. Hang on. Hang on. Quick question and I'll repeat it.
I want to know if you have a writing ritual thing that you may have to do, have a chair in a certain space, or you have a coffee, or when you have to, is there something you need to do?
Okay, so Maria's question, without using the word OCD, was, do you have a writing ritual, like you have to have a chair in the right place, or a coffee, or be facing 27 degrees north, or whatever it is? Amit, do you have a ritual or a need to make the beautiful words flow?
Yeah, I can only write at night time, roughly about 9 p.m. till about 1 a.m. because it's quiet, it's dark, and my books are quite dark and edgy. And I have to have, when I start writing a new book, so I have this ritual, I have to clear my desk, it has to be completely spotlessly clean, and there's no crap on there, no papers, no anything like that. It's just empty space and lovely, everything with rectangles and all that shit. And I have to have a this is so geeky, I can't believe I'm about to say this. I have to have a drink in my Batman mug. It's one of those Batman mugs where when you put like hot coffee in there, the bat symbol lights up.
I mean, when we discussed earlier, I say it's really interesting for the audience to reveal things about yourself. I should have mentioned there were limits.
Yeah. So it's the cheapest soap I've ever had. So yeah, I need to have a drink in my Batman mug, and my desk needs to be clear. And then as I start writing, and you get into like chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the desk becomes a complete mess. But the Batman mug remains. Yeah, somebody please tell a better story than that.
Thank you, Amit. Moving on. Alison.
Well, I can't understand this Batman mug business because not
Oh,
only
okay,
is the word as map, and as you put the hot water in it, the words come up.
Oh, I love it.
So I have that, but I have, I suppose, two sides to my writing life. When I'm writing prose, which is usually about writing poetry, I'm doing that straight onto the computer, usually with my legs slung at a strange angle over the arm of the chair, the computer perched on my lap, usually a cat somewhere under my elbow, and write like that. At any time of the day, the closer to the deadline I am, the more I accept variety of time of day, the more likely I am to start at 8 o'clock in the morning or something, instead of the preferred 9 o'clock at night. When I write poetry, it's very different. It's done by hand in an A5 size exercise book with hard covers in a black biro. And if anybody ever tells you you can write poetry with a blue biro, you don't But I tend to write lying flat on the floor, on my front obviously, and there's usually a cat in the small of my back. But the older I get, the longer it takes to stand up from the floor. So I'm now adapting so that I can actually sprawl across the bed, still on my front, still writing the poetry by hand.
Oh, that was beautiful. You should be a poet.
I'll work on that one, Simon.
All right.
I've got to look, also my screen has to be at 220%. You know, like the monitor, so the words are really big. So I don't know why. There's been a Twitter thing at the moment where all these writers are saying my screen has to be 150, 180. My number's 220. Do you
Yeah, again tonight, did it? Yeah. Sorry, Amit, but yet again tonight you're on your own.
I'm definitely going to therapy. Definitely.
Sophie, what about you? What are your rituals?
I don't have any specific conditions that need to exist for me to write. So, like, I probably at one time, years ago, would have said, oh yes, I need this, this and this to be in place. And what happened was, I've kept finding that I would be in a situation where I didn't have my ideal conditions. And so then I had a choice. I could either say, these are the conditions under which I cannot write, or I could just decide that actually I can write in any situation. So I did that, and so now I just write, you know, if I want or need to write, I just decide that whatever situation I happen to be in is perfect. So I love writing on planes, on trains, perched at a bus stop. If I'm at home, then I love writing at home, and I just kind of think, wherever I am, I can find a way of thinking this is actually brilliant that I'm writing in this situation. And I mean, I had to do that, otherwise I would have written a lot less, because, you know, I used to think I need really tidy everything. By nature, I am a tidiness freak. And so if I didn't have a family, my house would be 100% tidy all the time. But I do have a family, and they are not tidy, and they go around messing up every room. So when I used to think this is a problem and I can't write until the house is tidy, then I used to waste so much time tidying the house. And then I had the brilliant idea one day that I could just decide that it didn't matter at all if the house was messy. And as soon as I realised that that was the thing that would liberate me and I could get all my writing done, whatever state the house was in, then that was amazing, and I got a lot more written. So no, I'm really flexible.
God, I want to be Sophie Hannah.
But you could, like, what would happen if one day your Batman mug wasn't available? Would you really not be able to write?
I think the space-time continuum would end.
Yeah, I can't fault that in the slightest. Maria asked about me. Since Amit has shared, I will share as well. There's only one factor I need in my life to make things better and make things work. And it's a small, cuddly hedgehog called Bert, who has been with me since I was 21. And I know, and he's upstairs in my room in The Hague. So for those of you who think I don't have a heart, I still do have some, all right?
That's definitely weirder than my shoe, right?
It's not weird. You wouldn't tell we were getting on well before this. I want to ask you a question. You often get asked as a writer, where do the ideas come from? So I'm not going to ask that, but a variety of that. How do you know when you've got an idea which is a winner from all those that come to us? And Alison, can you help us with that?
Oh yes, very easy, because it's exactly the same as after the third glass of champagne. My knees wobble and my lips go numb.
Right.
I think that was one of the questions in the quiz.
Something has just happened which is a very rare experience, and I'm lost for words. Amit, you saved me this time. With all due trepidation, tell us how you know you've got a winner of an idea.
Yeah, I think it just pops into my mind, fully formed, that there's one single scene. It's just always a single scene. So I vividly remember that I was in a book launch for Girl Zero in Waterstones, and I looked up to the ceiling mid-question, and there was a dead body hanging from the ceiling. And I thought to myself, how the hell does a dead body get up at that ceiling? And literally that was the first chapter for City of Sinners, because that dead body on the ceiling just did not stop talking to me. How did I get there? Why did I get here? How the hell do you get 50 feet in the air with Bradford Waterstones? And then when the dead body came down, it's quite clearly dead, it's definitely dead, but it starts blinking and you think, what the hell's going on there? Bloody dead body's blinking. And I thought, how does a dead body blink? And literally the question, that scene never left my head, and I had to get Harry to figure it out. And it's the same with all of my books, it's just one key set piece, I call it, and the set piece just jumps in and it just will not let go. It just attaches to your brain and it says, figure me out. And that's generally how the ideas pop in. It's one scene that just will not go away.
Okay, and Sophie?
I think the ideas that are the best are the ones that would never go away. So sometimes you'll have an idea and by the next week you've either forgotten it or you've half forgotten it. If you have a brilliant idea, it just stays and it gets bigger and it gets more determined and it just never goes away, even if you don't make a note of it. So that's like when a brilliant idea just lands fully formed. But I think there's another thing that can happen, and I don't know whether this has ever happened to any of you, but you can have an idea and you think, I guess that's an okay idea. I quite like it, I don't love it. And what happens then is that often you just think, okay, well, I'll let that one slide and I'll wait for the better one. But what I've started to do now is if I have an idea like that feels a bit meh, I will say to myself, that is an only okay idea. What does it need to be added? What's the magic ingredient you can add to that idea that would get it up to the next level? And then, more often than not, something occurs to you and you go, okay, now it's promoted, because by that adding that one ingredient, it's sort of lifted up a bit.
I find with mine that it's like a relationship. You know, we make eyes at each other to start with, and we're kind of finding each other a bit cute, and then we hang out a bit together, and then, you know, we spend a bit of time together, and then it's like full on, yeah, we're going for it, yeah. So anybody who's hoping for a good night's sleep tonight, after the fire alarm, you can carry that image with you. As ever, with the chat show, the time has flown by. I just had to check my watch twice to realise that we're almost at the end. So there's one thing I'd like to just round up with tonight. All three of you have been to Swanwick before, some of us more than others, or four of us. Amit and Sophie, you've been before recently. You've been kind enough to want to come back and supported us very much. And Alison, you're a great supporter. Final question to you all, if I may, is this. What is it? Can you give us one magical moment from Swanwick which encapsulates this amazing place, these incredible people, and this shared joy and love of writing? Can you try and just put it into words for us, explain it in perhaps one example, one experience you've had? Amit, you're looking at me as if to say, don't you dare ask me that first.
That is absolutely right.
So I'll cut you some slack here. Alison, can you handle this one first?
Can I give you a double answer for this?
Yes.
In part, it's the fact that when you meet up with everybody, and the people who are here as white badges, excuse this, but it'll be you next year. When you meet up with everybody for the first time on Saturday, you pick up the conversation where you left it the Friday the previous August. And the second piece is, this is the place where you hear the most bizarre conversations on earth. I always remember once when I was in a shared room situation, and one of my two roommates, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, said, "Wake up, you two, wake up. Tell me, did the Romans eat boiled eggs?" She promptly went back to sleep. Carried on discussing the point. As I say, the most bizarre conversations. If you need someone to find your ideas, that's the place.
Sophie, you've been here a little more recently than Alison and myself. What was it that you found that really struck you?
Well, I always find it difficult to put into words my reaction to places and events. I don't find anything else difficult to put into words, but I make up my mind very quickly about places, whether it's, you know, in a literary event context, whether it's a festival or a writers' conference or whatever it is. I arrive and I instantly know how I feel about it. And when I arrived at Swanwick in 2017, I just got out of my car and walked in and just got a really good vibe. I was like, yeah, this is great. I like all this. I haven't even spoken to anyone yet. There is just a very, very good, happy energy associated with everything, like the people and the buildings and the lawn, you know, maybe not the fire alarm, but, you know, everything else. So that, like, it's really hard to put into words, but I very often do the opposite thing. I'll go to an event somewhere and I'll think, yeah, this is obviously fine for an evening, but I'm never doing this again. And with Swanwick, I had the opposite reaction. I was like, yeah, this is somewhere that good things happen. So that's my sort of vague and shadowy answer, but on a very mundane and practical level, a brilliant thing about Swanwick is that so far this time, two separate kind Swanwickers have given me cigarettes. And even better than that, a third kind Swanwicker, I don't yet know who, is going to give me a cigarette later. That person, it's to you. If it is, come and find me afterwards.
And Amit, no pressure, but this will be our last answer tonight. And you've already revealed some pretty impressive and startling things, which I think will live long in our memories and the memory of Swanwick. But no pressure with that big build-up. Go.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of literary festivals and, you know, some of the big sort of marquee names that are on the events calendar. And sometimes you can go to them and they can feel quite mechanical and quite sort of structured in a way that feels like a business. But I think there's a natural chemistry here. I guess the chemist in me can say that. There's just a natural chemistry here between the people. And it just feels warm and not mechanical. It feels like home almost. Do you know what I mean? You just want to come in, have a cup of tea. You can sort of meet everybody. And to be honest, it was my first Swanwick last year, and it was just I was really overwhelmed. You know, I did my sort of speech, and I always speak quite freely from the heart, as you all well know by now. And the reception was really lovely. The feedback was amazing. Phil's been great in terms of support last year and support this year. And I guess the committee team and the people on the ground floor, there's just a natural chemistry to this place, which works, and it doesn't feel mechanical or forced compared to some of the literary festivals that we go to up and down the country. And for that reason, it just feels like coming home. That's the best way I can say it.
Which is a lovely note to end this evening on. So I've got many little notes from what we've talked about tonight, but just summarising, from Batman mugs to cuddling cats in the small of the bag for inspiration, to fantasies about Jacob Rees-Mogg. I can truly say this has been a most unique and excellent evening. Please thank you, panel.
Amit and Sophie will be signing books in the information room, so please do go along there. But what a great event! Thank you, A A Dhand and Alison Chisholm and Sophie Hannah, and of course, thank you all.